As the world comes together on April 15, 2014, to remember the tragedy that occurred just 1 year ago today, many lessons have been learned from the Boston Marathon bombings. The two improvised explosive devices that ripped through the crowd gathered near the finish line left 3 people dead, including an 8-year-old boy, and left hundreds more spectators injured. The pressure cooker bombs were filled with shrapnel to ensure traumatic injury to as many victims as possible. The resulting investigation and manhunt left the city of Boston paralyzed, with an MIT police officer being murdered in the 4 days following the bombings. The 4 intense days resulted in the identification of the 2 suspects, and the manhunt gave rise to numerous additional crime scenes, shootouts with additional IED explosions, and the killing of 1 suspect and the other being taken into custody. In the year since the bombing, there has been plenty of time for reflection, and many non-related issues have affected the way law enforcement will combat terrorist threats in the future. As we look back on law enforcement response to the Boston Marathon attacks and the lessons learned from the previous terrorist attacks, the evidence is clear. The response to such events has been greatly improved. In the decades since the attacks of 9/11, the Department of Homeland Security was founded. Scenario-based training has become a staple of critical incident response, and first responders' ability to respond to such incidents has been greatly improved. The response by all different agencies involved in Boston Marathon tragedy has earned the praises of numerous entities, including the Harvard Kennedy School. The after-response report by Harvard credited the Boston area scenario-based training, which involved 50 agencies and over 600 personnel, for the successful response to the incident. The report praises the response to the initial attack, from evacuating the wounded and securing the scene to quick investigation and the use of video and photograph evidence, both from fixed security cameras and the public's assistance. This Harvard report acknowledges officials' use of the images of the suspect to elicit identification from the citizens. The flood of information from the public was then efficiently cataloged and followed up on by investigators. The identification of the suspects, along with the suspects' actions, made it possible for law enforcement to locate the suspects and bring a relatively quick resolution to the incident with just 1 additional loss of life. The preparedness of all agencies involved led FEMA's Deputy Administrator Richard Cierno to state the fact that the response was so well executed wasn't an accident. It was a result of years of planning and coordination. The praise received by all agencies involved was well deserved, but there are certainly areas that can be improved. The same Harvard report addressed one area of improvement was tactical response by law enforcement to the scene in Watertown where the first shootout with the suspects occurred, as well as the scene where the second suspect was taken into custody. The report is critical of law enforcement's actions by what it characterized as self-deployment. The Harvard report explains how far too many officers arrived at these 2 scenes without being dispatched, causing tactical issues. These tactical issues led to crossfire and friendly fire issues, with 1 officer being critically injured from suspected friendly fire. The report suggests law enforcement needs to get out of the mentality that more is better, and the supervisions issue caused by self-deployment. These issues will be addressed during training and will result in a better response for the next critical incident. The most pressing issue I would like to discuss in the aftermath of Boston Marathon bombing is how law enforcement and intelligence agencies thwart future attacks by these lone wolf attackers. Organizer events like the Boston Marathon can institute any number of safety measures, but the truth is, in an open and free society, complete safety at these events will prove very costly and difficult. I would suggest this leaves law enforcement to rely on intelligence and their ability to thwart these attacks in the planning stages of their operations. The ability to gather intelligence often collides with constitutional issues. In the wake of the 9/11 attacks, Congress passed the Patriot Act and has since renewed the act. Among its enhancement capabilities is warrantless wiretaps, which were approved to track terrorist activities. The problem is certain law enforcement entities are using these provisions for non-terrorist related activities, which result in a distrust of law enforcement by politicians and the citizens. The more recent issue surrounds the intelligence gathering activities of the National Security Agency, of which made Edward Snowden front-page news all around the world. The incredible capabilities of the NSA were exposed by this so-called whistleblower, and in my opinion, one of the greatest traitors this country has ever known. With all that being said, the exposure of these intelligence activities has many Americans, including myself, questioning how far will the people allow their government to go in the name of safety. The government has a long-standing history as if you give them an inch, they will take a mile, and the government's overreach is as sure as the sun is of rising each day. The American people are faced with this dilemma of the protection afforded by the Constitution of the United States and the need for protection against future terrorist attacks. This dilemma will continue for the foreseeable future, with Americans deciding what rights they are willing to give up in the name of security. Benjamin Franklin once was quoted, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Now, there are people who will argue what Benjamin Franklin actually meant by this quote, but its teachings has meaning regardless. The founders of this great nation were suspicious of government and wanted to limit the government's power. With that being said, the founders could have never fathomed the times we live in today, from the threats of terrorists and the technology available to detect these threats. I, like many Americans, struggle with this issue by leaning towards the government in times of crisis while pulling back in times of relative safety. This issue will continue to be a dilemma for the American people, and the inevitable next terrorist attack by lone wolf attackers will inevitably bring calls for better intelligence gathering. Thank you.